Hello and welcome back to part 9 of our exploration into Babylonia and Assyria. Once again, a link to the original work will be posted in the description. And now let us continue with today's chapter, which is focused around letter writing, the post system. How strange to think that they had that so long ago. Well, they did. And it's quite interesting. So let's all get nice and relaxed. Oh, and if you're enjoying the series, you can follow along. I'll organize it into a playlist. Either that or I'll leave a link to the part 8 in the pinned comment. Let's begin. We are apt to look upon letter writing as a modern invention. Some of us, perhaps, as a modern plague. But as a matter of fact, it is an invention almost as old as civilization itself. As soon as man began to invent characters, and by means which he could communicate his thoughts to others, he began to use them for holding intercourse with his absent friends. They took the place of oral messages, which was neither so confidential nor so safe. Classical scholars have been familiar with the fact that letter writing was one of the accomplishments of an educated Greek and Roman. The letters of Cicero and Pliny are famous, and the letters of Plato and Aristotle have been studied by a select few. Even Homer, who seems to avoid all reference to the art of writing as if it were an unclean thing, tells us of the baleful characters written on folded tablets and sent by Protos to the king of Lycia. Criticism, it is true, not so long ago doubted the facts of the story and tried to resolve the characters and tablets into child's drawings upon the slate. But archaeology has come to the rescue of Protos. And while we know now that the letters passed freely backward and forward in the world in which he is supposed to have moved, Mr. Arthur Evans has discovered the very symbols which he is likely to have used. Even the Lycians, to whom the letter was sent, have been found, not only on the Egyptian monuments, but also in the tablets of Tel el Amarna. Letter writing in the East goes back to remote antiquity. In the book of the Chronicles, it is stated that the messages that passed between Hiram and Solomon were in writing, but the age of Solomon was modern when compared to that which some of the letters we now possess actually belong. Centuries earlier, the words message and letter have become synonymous terms. And in Hebrew, the word which had originally signified message had come to mean book. Not only is a message conceived of as always written, but even the idea of a book is taken from that of a letter. Nothing can show more plainly the importance occupied by literary correspondence in the ancient Oriental world, or the antiquity to which the art of letter writing reaches back. While in Egypt, the letter was usually written upon papyrus. In Western Asia, the ordinary writing material was clay. Babylonia had been the nurse and mother of its culture, and the writing material of Babylonia was also clay. Originally, pictorial hieroglyphics had been drawn upon it, but just as in Egypt, the hieratic or running hand of scribes developed out into primitive pictographs, so too in Babylon the pictures degenerated into cuneiform characters which corresponded with hieratic characters of the Egyptian script. What we call cuneiform is essentially a cursive hand. As for books, so also for letters, the clay tablet was employed. It may seem to us indeed a somewhat cumbrous mode of sending a letter, but it had the advantage of being solid and less likely to be injured or destroyed than other writing materials. The characters upon it could not be obliterated by a shower of rain, and there was no danger of it being torn. Moreover, it must be remembered that the tablet was usually of small size. The cuneiform system of writing allows a large number of words to be compressed into a small space, and the writing is generally so minute as to try the eyes of the modern decipherer. Some of the letters which have been discovered during the last few years go back to the early days of the Babylonian monarchy. Many of them are dated in the reign of Hammurabi or Amraphel, among them being several were written by the king himself. That we should possess the autographed letters of a contemporary of Abraham is one of the romances of historical science, for it must be remembered that the letters are not copies, but the original documents themselves. What would not classical scholars give for the autograph originals of the letters of Cicero, or theologians for the actual manuscripts that were written by the evangelists? And yet here we have the private correspondence of the prince who took part in the campaign against Sodom and Gomorrah. One of these letters, which has found a resting place in the Museum of Constantinople, refers to another part of the actors in the campaign against the cities of the Kunai Plain. This was the king of Elam, Chedor Laomer, whose name is written Kudur Log Gamar in the form. The Elamites had invaded Babylonia and made it subject and tributary. Sin Idinam, the king of Larsa, called Elasar in the book of Genesis, and had been compelled to fly from his ancestral kingdom in the south of Chaldea and to take refuge in Babylon at the court of Hammurabi. Eri Aku, or Arioch, the son of an Elamite prince, was placed on the throne of Larsa, while Hammurabi also had to acknowledge himself a vassal of the Elamite king. But a time came when Hammurabi believed himself strong enough to shake the Elamite yoke, and though the war at first seemed to go against him, he ultimately succeeded in making himself independent. Arioch and his Elamite allies were driven from Larsa, and Babylon became part of the new united monarchy. It was after the overthrow of the Elamites that the letter was written in which mention is made of Chedor Laomer. Its discoverer, Per Shiel, gives the following translation of it. To Sin Idinam, Hammurabi says, I send you as a present the images of the goddess of the land of Emutalum, as a reward for your valor on the day of the defeat of Chedorlaomer. If the enemy annoy you, destroy their forces with the troops at your disposal, and let the images be restored in safety to their old habitations. The letter was found at Senkere, the ancient Larsa, where doubtless it had been treasured in the archive chamber of the palace. Two other letters of Hammurabi, which are now at Constantinople, have also been translated by Dr. Shiel, and one of them is as follows. To Sin Idinam, Hammurabi says, when you have seen this letter, you will understand in regard to Amil Shamash and Nur Nintu, the sons of Gisduba, that if they are in Larsa, or in any territory of Larsa, you will order them to be sent away, and that one of your servants, on whom you can depend, shall take them and bring them to Babylon. The second letter relates to some officials about whom it would seem the king of Lhasa had complained to his suzerain lord. To Sin Idinam, Hammurabi says, "As to the officials who have resisted you in the accomplishment of their work, do not impose upon them any additional task, but oblige them to do what they ought to have performed, and then remove them from the influence of him who has brought them." Long before the age of Hammurabi, a royal post had been established in Babylon for the conveyance of letters. Fragments of clay have been found at Tello, bearing the impressions of seals belonging to the officials of Sargon of Akkad and his successor, and addressed to the viceroy of Lagash, to King Naram Sin, and other personages. They were, in fact, the envelopes of letters and dispatches which passed between Lagash and Agade, or Akkad, the capital of the dynasty. Sometimes, however, the clay fragment has found the form of a ball, and must then have been attached by a string to the missive, like the seals of medieval deeds. In either case, the seal of the functionary from whom the missive came was imprinted upon it, as well as the address of the person for whom it was intended. Thousands of letters seem to have passed to and fro in this manner, making it clear that the postal service of Babylonia was already well organized in the time of Sargon and Naram Sin. The Tel El Amarna letters show that in the 15th century before our era, a similar postal service was established throughout the Eastern world, from the banks of the Euphrates to those of the Nile. To what an antiquity it reached back is at present impossible to say. At all events, when Hammurabi was king, letters were frequent and common among those educated classes of the population. Most of those which have been preserved are from private individuals to another, and consequently, though they tell us nothing about the political events of the time, they do illustrate the social life of the period, and prove how it was quite like our own. One of them, for instance, describes the writer's journey to Elam and Arapactis, while another relates a ferry boat and the boathouse in which it was kept. The boathouse, we are told, had fallen into decay in the reign of Hammurabi and was sadly in want of repair, while the chief duty of the writer, who seems to have been the captain of the boat, was to convey the merchants who brought various commodities to Babylon. If the merchant, the letter states, was furnished with a royal passport, we carried him across the river. If he had no passport, he was not allowed to go into Babylon. Among other purposes from which the vessel had been used was the conveyance of lead, and it was capable of taking as much as 10 talents of the metal. We further gather from the letter that it was the custom to employ Bedouin as messengers. Among the early Babylonian documents found in Sippara and now in the Museum of Constantinople, which have been published by Dr. Scheel, are 2 private letters of the same age and similar character. The first is as follows: "To my father, thus says Zimri Eram, may the sun god and Merodach grant thee everlasting life. May your health be good. I write to ask how you are. Send me back news of your health. I am at present at Dur Sin, on the canal of Beit Sikir. In the place where I am living, there is nothing to be had for food, so I am sealing up and sending you 3/4 of a silver shekel. In return for the money, send some good fish and other provisions for me to eat. The second letter was dispatched from Babylon, and runs thus. To the Lady Casper thus says Gimil Merodach, May the sun god and Merodach, for my sake, grant thee everlasting life. I am writing to inquire about your health. Please send me news of it. I am living at Babylon, but have not seen you, which troubles me greatly. Send me news of your coming to me, so that I may be happy. Come in the month of Marchesvan. May you live forever for my sake. It is plain that the writer was deeply in love with his correspondent, and had grown impatient to see her again. Both belonged to what we should call the professional classes, and nothing can better illustrate how like in the matter of correspondence that age of Abraham was like to our own. The old Babylonian's letter might have easily been written today, apart from the references to Merodach and the sun god. It must be noticed, moreover, that the lady whom the letter is addressed is expected to reply to it. It is taken for granted that the ladies of Babylon could read and write just as well as the men could. This, however, is only what might have been concluded from the fact that Babylonian social life, and the footing of equality with man upon which the women were placed in all matters of business, the fact that she could hold and bequeath property, and trade with it independently, implies that she was expected to know how to read and write. Even among the Tel el Amarna, we find one or two from a lady who seems to have taken an active part in the politics of the day. To the king, my lord, she writes in one of them, My gods, my sun god, thus says Nin, thy handmaid, the dust of thy feet. At the feet of the king, my lord, my gods, my sun god, 7 times I prostrate myself. Let the king, my lord, wrest his country from the hand of the Bedouin, in order that they may not rob it. The city of Zaphon has been captured. This is the information of the king, my lord. The letters of Tel el Amarna bridge over the gulf that separates the early Babylonia of Hammurabi from the later Assyria of Tiglath-Pileser III and his successors. The inner life of the intervening period is still better known to us, but imperfectly. No library or large collection of tablets belonging to it has as yet been discovered, and until this is the case, we must remain less intimately acquainted with it, as we are the age of Hammurabi on the other hand, or that of the Second Assyrian Empire on the other. It is true that the library of Nineveh, of which Ashurbanipal was such a magnificent patron, has preserved copies of some of the earlier epistolary literature of the country. Thus we have from it a fragment of a letter written by a king of Babylonia to 2 kings of Assyria, at a time when Assyria still acknowledged the supremacy of Babylon. But such documents are very rare, and apart from the Tel el Amarna tablets, we have to descend to the days of the Second Assyrian Empire before we find again such a collection of letters. These are letters generally addressed to the Assyrian government, or more generally to the king. In the reigns of Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser IV, Sargon, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and Ashurbanipal, they were preserved in the royal library of Nineveh, principally on the account of their political and diplomatic importance, and now they are in the British Museum. As might have been expected from their character, they throw more light on the politics of the day than on the social condition of the people. A few of them, however, are private communications to the king on matters other than political ones. and we also find among them reports in the form of letters from royal astronomers, as well as upon such subjects as the importation of horses from Asia Minor for the royal stud. The letters have been copied by Professor R.F. Harper, who is now publishing them into a series of volumes. How numerous the letters are may be gathered from the fact that no less than 1,575 of them, including the fragments, have come from that part of the library alone which was excavated by Sir A.H. Layard, and was the first to be brought to England. Many of them are dispatches from generals in the field, from the governors of the frontier towns who write to inform Assyrian government, of the movements of the enemy on the political events in their own neighborhood. It is from these letters, for example, that we learn the name of the king of Ararat, who was the antagonist of Sennacherib, and the predecessor of King Erymanus, to whom his murderers fled for protection. These details, again, of the long Elamite War, which eventually laid Susa at the feet of Assyria, had been given to us by them. It is needless, therefore, to insist upon the value they possess for the historian. Among them, however, as has already been said, are some of a more private character. Here, for instance, is one that reminds us that human nature is as much the same in all ages of the world. To the king, my lord, thy servant, Sol Miti Yadulit, salutation to the king, my lord, may Nebo and Merodach forever be gracious to the king, my lord. Bao Gamilat, the handmaid of the king, is constantly ill. She cannot eat a morsel of food. Let the king send orders that some physician may go and see her. In another letter, the writer expresses his gratitude to the king for his kindness in sending him his own doctor, who had cured him of a serious illness. May Ishtar of Erech, he says, of Nana, grant long life to the king, my lord, for he sent Basa, the physician of the king, my lord, to save my life and has cured me. Therefore, may the great gods of heaven and earth be gracious to the king, my lord, and may they establish the throne of the king, my lord, in heaven forever, since I was dead, and the king has restored me to life. In fact, there are a good many letters which relate to medical matters. Thus, Dr. Johnston gives the following translation of a certain Arad Nana, who seems to have been a consulting physician. It goes to Esarhaddon about a friend of the prince who had suffered from violent bleeding of the nose. As regards to the patient who has a bleeding from the nose, the Rab Mag, or chief physician, reports, yesterday, towards evening, there was a good deal of hemorrhage. The dressings have not been properly applied. They have been placed outside the nostrils, oppressing the breathing and coming off when there is a hemorrhage. Let them be put inside the nostrils, and then the air will be excluded and the hemorrhage stopped. If it is agreeable to my lord, the king, I will go tomorrow and give instructions. Meanwhile, let me know how the patient is. Another letter from Arad Nana, translated by the same Assyriologist, is as follows. To the king, my lord, thy servant Arad Nana, may there be peace forever and ever to the king, my lord. May Ninip and Gula grant health of the soul and the body to the king, my lord. All is going on well with the poor fellow whose eyes are deceased. I had applied a dressing covering the face. Yesterday, toward evening, undoing the bandage which held it in place, I removed the dressing. There was pus upon the dressing, the size of the tip of the little finger. If any of your gods set his hand thereto, let him say so. Salutation forever. Let the heart of the king, my lord, be rejoiced. Within 7 or 8 days the patient will recover. The doctors were not alone in writing to the Assyrian king. Besides the reports which they were bound to make, the astronomers also sent letters to him on the results of their observations. Among the letters published by Professor Harper is an interesting one, unfortunately defaced and imperfect, which was sent to Nineveh from one of the observatories in Babylonia. After the ordinary compliments, the writer, Abil Ishtar, says, "As for the eclipse of the moon, about which my king, my lord, has written to me, a watch was kept for it in the cities of Akkad, Borsippa, and Nippur. We observed it ourselves in the city of Akkad." Abil Ishtar then goes on to describe the progress of the eclipse, but the lines are so broken as to be untranslatable. And when the text becomes perfect again, we find him saying that he has written an exact report of the whole occurrence and sent it to the letter of the king. And whereas the king, my lord, ordered me to observe the eclipse of the sun, I watched it to see whether it took place or not, and what passed before my eyes, I now report to the king, my lord. It was an eclipse of the moon that took place. It was a total of Assyria, and the shadow fell upon the land of the Amorites, the land of the Hittites, and in part the land of the Chaldees. We gather from this letter that there were no less than 3 observatories in northern Babylonia, one at Akkad near Sippara, one at Nippur, one in Nefer, and one at Borsippa, within sight of Babylon. As Borsippa possessed a university, it was natural that one of the 3 observations should be established there. As nothing is said about the eclipse of the sun which the astronomers at the Assyrian court had led the king to expect, it is probable that it did not take place, or at all events that it did not occur so soon as it was anticipated. The expression, "the land of the Amorites and of the Hittites," is noteworthy on the account of its biblical ring. In the mind of the Assyrian, however, it merely denoted Palestine and northern Syria. Babylonians at an early age called Palestine the land of the Amorites. The Assyrians termed it the land of the Hittites, and it would appear that in the days of the Second Assyrian Empire, when Babylonia had become a province of its Assyrian rival, the 2 names were combined together in order to denote what we should entitle Syria. Letters, however, were written to the king by all sorts of people, and upon all sorts of business. Thus we find Ashurbanipal, the captain of a river barge, writing about the conveyance of some of those figures of colossal bulls which adorned the entrance to the palace of Sennacherib. The letter is short and to the point. "To the king, my lord, thy servant Ashurbanipal, salutation to the king, my lord. Ashurmukin has ordered me to transport in the boats the colossal bulls and cherubim of stone. The boats are not strong enough and are not ready. But if a present be kindly made to us, we will see that they are got ready and ascend to the river." The unblushing way in which bakshish is here demanded shows that in this respect, at all events, the East has changed but little. Of quite a different character is a letter about some wine that was sent to the royal cellars. The writer says in it, "As for the wine, about which the king my lord has written to me, there are 2 homers of it for keeping, as well as plenty of the best oil." Later on in the same letter, reference is made to Targumanu, or Dragoman, who was sent along with the wine, which probably came from the Armenian highlands. It may be noted that in another letter mention was made of a master of languages who was employed in deciphering the dispatches from Ararat. A letter from the cellars of the palace has been translated as follows by Dr. Johnson. To the king, our lord, thy servants Bel Ikisa and Bel Lu, salutation to the king, our lord. May Ashur, Bel, and Nebo grant long life and everlasting years to the king, our lord. Let the king, our lord, know that the wine received during the month of Tebet has been bottled. But there is no room for it, so we must make new cellars for the king, our lord. Let the king, our lord, give orders that a place for the cellars be shown to us, and we shall be relieved from our embarrassment. The wine that has come for the king, our lord, is very considerable. Where shall we put it? A good deal of correspondence relates to the importation of horses from Eastern Asia Minor for the stables of the Assyrian king. The following is a specimen of what they are like. To the king, my lord, thy servant Nebo sum idin, salutation to the king, my lord, forever and ever may Nebo and Merodach be gracious. 13 horses from the land of Kusa, 3 fowls from the land of Kusa, in all 16 draft horses, 14 stallions, altogether 30 horses and 9 mules, in all 39 from the city of Corn, 6 from the land of Kusa, 3 fowls from Kusa, in all 9 draft horses. All are gelted, 13 stallions and 10 mules, altogether 23 from Isana, in all 54 from Kusa and 104 stallions, making 148 horses and 30 mules, altogether 177, have been imported. Dated to the 2nd day of Sivan. The land of Kusa is elsewhere associated with the land of Mesa, which must also have lain to the northwest of Syria, among the valleys of the Taurus. Kulania, which is mentioned in the city of Kusa, is the Kalne of the Old Testament, which Isaiah couples with Carchemish, and of which Amos says it lays on the road to Hamath. The whole of this country, including the plains of Cilicia, has been famous for horse breeding, and of one of the letters the Assyrian king specifically mentions Melid, the modern Malatia, as exporting them to Nineveh. Here the writer, after stating that he had inscribed in a register the number of horses that had just arrived from Arapakatis, goes on to say, "What are the orders of the king about the horses which have arrived this very day before the king? Shall they be stabled in the garden palace, or shall they be put out to grass? Let the king, my lord, send word whether they shall be put out to grass, or whether they are to be stabled." As in natural, several of these letters are upon religious matters. Among these which have been translated by Dr. Johnson, there is one which throws light on religious persecutions which were held in honor of the gods, processions rather than persecutions, to apologize. It reads as follows. To the son of the king, my lord, thy servant Nebo-sun Idina's salutation to the son of the king, my lord, forever and ever. On the 3rd day of the month, Iyar, the city of Kala, will consecrate the couch of Nebo, and the god will enter the bedchamber. On the 4th day, Nebo will return. The son of the king, my lord, has now received the news. I am the governor of the temple of Nebo, thy god, and will therefore go. At Kala, the god will come forth from the interior of the palace, and from the interior of the palace will go to the grove. A sacrifice will be offered. The charioteer of the gods will go from the stable of the gods, will take the god out of it, will carry him in procession and bring him back. This is the course of the procession. of the vase bearers. Whoever has a sacrifice to make will offer it. Whoever offers up 1 car of his food may enter the temple of Nebo. May the offerers fully accomplish the ordinances of the gods to the life and health of the son of the king my lord. What commands has the son of the king my lord sent to me? May Bel and Nebo, who granted me in the month of Sebat, protect thy life of the son of the king my lord, and cause thy sovereignty to continue to the end of time. There is another letter in which Dr. Johnston's rendering, if it be correct, is in reference made to the inscriptions that were written on the walls of temples, like the texts on the book of Deuteronomy offers to be inscribed on the doorposts and gates, being that from Deuteronomy 6:9 and 6:20. To the king my lord, thy servant Ishtar Turi salutations to the king my lord. I am sending Nebo Sun Idina and Nebo Erba, the physicians of whom I spoke to the king with my messengers, to the presence of the king my lord. Let them be admitted to the presence of the king my lord, and let the king my lord converse with them. I have not disclosed to them the real fact, and tell them nothing. As the king my lord commands, so it is done. Shamash Bel Utsur sends word from the city of Der that there are no inscriptions which can place on the walls of Beth El. I sent accordingly to the king my lord in order that an inscription be written and dispatched, and that the rest may soon be written and placed on the walls of Beth El. There has been a great deal of rain, but the harvest is gathered. May the heart of my king my lord rejoice. While the letters which have been found on the side of Nineveh come from the royal archives, and are therefore, with few exceptions, addressed to the king, those which have been discovered in Babylonia have more usually been sent by one private individual to another. They represent, for the most part, the private correspondence of the country, and prove how widely education must have been diffused there. Most of them, moreover, belong to the age of Hammurabi, or that of the kings of Ur who preceded the dynasty to which he belonged, and thus cast an unexpected light on the life of the Babylonian community in times of Abraham. Here, for example, is one that was written by a tenant to his landlord. It goes as follows. To my lord, says Ibgatum, your servant, as my lord, you have heard an enemy has carried away my oxen. Though I never before wrote to you, my lord, now I send this letter. O my lord, send me a cow. I will lie up 5 shekels of silver, and send them to my lord, even to you. O my lord, by the command of Merodach, you determine whatever place you prefer to be in. No one can hinder you, my lord. O my lord, as I will send you by night 5 shekels of silver, which I am tying up, so do you put them away at night. O my lord, grant my request, and do glorify my head, and in the sight of my brethren my head shall not be humbled. As to what I send you, my lord will not be angry. I am your servant. Your wishes, my lord, I have performed superabundantly. Therefore entrust me with the cow which you, my lord, shall send, and in the town of Urubatsu your name, my lord, shall be celebrated forever. If you, my lord, grant me this favor, send the cow with Ili Iksam, my brother, and let it come, and I will work diligently at the business of my lord, if he will send the cow. I am tying up the 5 shekels of silver, and am sending them all in haste to you, my lord. Ibgatum was evidently the lessee of a farm, and he does his best to get a cow out of his landlord in order to make up for the loss of his oxen. The 5 shekels probably represented the rent due to his landlord, and his promptitude in sending them was one of the arguments he used to get the cow. Now, the word rendered, tie up, means literally to yoke, so that the shekels would appear to have been in the form of rings rather than bars of metal. A letter in the collection of Sir Henry Peck has been translated by Mr. Pinchers, is addressed to the landlord by his agent or factor, whose duty it was to look after the country estates, and it runs as follows. Letter from Dian Bel Ushur to Sirgu, my lord. I pray today to Bel and Nebo for the preservation of the life of my lord. As regards to the oxen which my lord has sent, Bel and Nebo know that there is an ox among them. For them from thee. I have made the irrigation canal and wall. I have seen thy servant with the sheep, and thy servant with the oxen. Order also that an ox may be brought up thence as an offering unto Nebo. For I have not purchased a single ox for money. I saw 56 of them on the 20th day, when I offered sacrifice to Shamash. I have also caused 20 head to be sent from his hands to my lord. As for the garlic, which my lord bought from the governor, the owner of the field took possession of it when the sellers had gone away, and the governor of the district sold it for silver. So the plantations also I am guarding there, and my lord has asked, Why hast thou not sent the messenger, and why hast thou not measured the grain? About this I also send thee word. Let a messenger take and deliver thy message. Another letter of the same age is interesting, as showing that the name of the national god of Yahum, or Yahweh of Israel in those times, was also known in Babylonia at a much earlier date than hitherto has been suspected. To Igash Nin Sag, thus says Yahum Elu, As thou knowest, Ada Elu has obtained for me the money, for the maidservant Kisam Ezib. Mida, the merchant, has settled the price with me. Now let the notary of Babylon send Arad Ishtar in, the 3 shekels of silver which you have had in hand, and the 2 shekels which you have put out at interest. And I will straightway bring the money and Arad Ishtar. Do not hinder Arad Ishtar, and I will straightway bring him to the government. Yahum Elu is the Joel of the Old Testament. The final M, which is distinguished from the language of the early Babylonian and southern Arabia, and the names probably belong to one of those Amorites or natives of Syria, Palestine, who were settled in Babylonia. Yahum Elu, however, might have also been a native of southern Arabia. The important fact is the occurrence of the name at so early a date. That the clay tablet should ever have been used for an epistolatory purpose seems strange to us, when we are accustomed to paper and envelopes, things of that nature. But it occupied no more space than many modern official letters, and was lighter to carry than most of the packages that pass through the parcel post. Now and then it was enveloped in an outer covering of clay, on which the address and chief comments of it were noted, but the public were usually prevented from knowing what it contained in another way. Before it was handed over to the messenger or the postman, it was sealed, which genuinely appears to mean that it was deposited in some receptacle, perhaps of leather, or maybe of linen, which was then tied up. In fact, Babylonian and Assyrian letters were treated much as ours were when they are put into a post bag, which the seals of the post office are attached. There were excellent roads all over Western Asia, with post stations at intervals where relays of horses could be procured. Along these, all letters to or from the king and the government were carried by royal messengers. It is probable that the letters of private individuals were also carried by the same hands. The letters of Tel el Amarna give us an idea of the wide extension of the postal system and the ease with which letters were constantly being conveyed from one part of the East to another. The foreign correspondence of the pharaoh was carried on it with Babylonia and Assyria in the east, Mesopotamia and Cappadocia in the north, and Palestine and Syria in the west. The civilized and oriental world was thus bound together by a network of postal routes over which literary intercourse was perpetually passing. They extended from the Euphrates to the Nile, and from the plateau of Asia Minor to the confines of Arabia. These routes followed the old lines of war and trade along which armies had marched and merchants had travelled for generations unnumbered. The Tel el Amarna tablets show us that letter writing was not confined to Assyria and Babylonia on the one hand, or to Egypt on the other. Wherever the ancient culture of Babylonia had spread, there had gone with it not only the cuneiform characters and the use of clay as a writing material, but the artistry of letter writing as well. The Canaanite corresponded with his friends and neighbors quite as much as the Babylonian did, and in his correspondence was conducted in the same language and script. Hiram of Tyre, in sending letters to Solomon, did but carry on the traditions of a distant past. Long before the Israelites entered Palestine, on both foreign and inland postal service had been established while it was still under Babylonian rule. The art of reading and writing must have been widely spread, and when it is remembered that for the large number of Tel el Amarna writers was the language system of writing which they used was of foreign origin, it may be concluded that the education given at the time was of no despicable character. The same conclusion may be drawn from another fact. The spelling of the Babylonian and Assyrian letters is in general extraordinarily correct. We meet, of course, with numerous colloquialisms which do not occur in the literary texts, and now and then with provincial expressions, but it is seldom that a word is incorrectly written. Even in the Tel el Amarna tablets, where all kinds of local pronunciations are reproduced, the orthography is usually flawless, in spite of the phonetic spelling. All this shows how carefully the writers might have been instructed at school. The correctness of the spelling in the Assyrian letters is really something marvelous, especially when we consider all the difficulties of the cuneiform script and what a tax it must have been to the memory to remember the multitudes of characters of the syllabary with their still more multitudinous phonetic and ideographic values. It gives us a high idea of perfection to which the teacher's art had already been brought. In Assyria, however, the writers usually belonged to the special class of scribes who employed the same conventional hand and devoted their lives to the acquisition of learning. It is probable that they acted as private secretaries as well as public clerks, and that consequently many of the letters which purport to come from other members of the community were really written from professional scribes. But in Babylonia it is difficult to find any traces of the public or private letter writer who is so conspicuous a figure in the East. It is seldom, if ever, that the Babylonian, whoever it may be, betrays any ignorance of the art of reading or writing, and the endless variety of handwritings and the execrable character of many of them indicate pretty plainly that the aid of the professional letter writer was rarely invoked. In a commercial community like that of Babylonia, an ability to write was a necessary matter of primary importance. And there you have it, the post system of Babylonia. Who would have thought that that would have been so interesting? Well, I assume that you found it interesting. If you're listening to this message, you're still here. And, well, you wouldn't be here if you did not find it interesting. Right? Anyway, I will thank my top-tier patrons and supporters, both here on YouTube and on Patreon. That's Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fazabo, Legitimus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro, Nerd, Cameron, Alexander, Nicholas, Daniel, JR, Charlene, and Christopher. Thank you so much. And as always, I wish you all the best. I hope you learned a whole bunch about Babylonia. Go and tell your friends about the Babylonian postal system now. I'm sure that they'll be charmed to hear all about it. Good night, my friend, and lots of love to all of you all over the world.